Do you believe in turning back time? Genecia Lembres, the most talented mage in the Empire, spent her entire youth researching time magic for the man she loved, but her devotion was repaid with the cruelest betrayal imaginable. Prince Xavier, the man she trusted with her whole heart, and Lisbeth, her only best friend, conspired to steal her research and left her to burn alive in a raging inferno. But then a miracle happened. In her dying moments, Genecia succeeded in creating time magic and returned to 1 month before her engagement to Xavier. This time she won't be that naive, easily deceived girl anymore. Armed with memories of the future and burning determination for revenge, Genecia sought out the second Prince Kalyan, rumored to be the most ruthless and cold-hearted member of the royal family. Will her sweet revenge unfold as planned? Join us as we dive into this thrilling story of betrayal, magic, and second chances. In the mansion of the court wizard Lembres, the main lab was a complete mess standing in the middle of the circle, and he needed her help to rise to power. For the protagonist, such power meant absolutely nothing. But the protagonist understood that people would want her bloodline, not her. Besides, if the Emperor supported her and Xavier, no one would oppose or propose marriage. She needed a solid reason to cancel the engagement, and only one person came to the butler's mind. We're talking about Prince Kalyan, the second potential heir of Giron, whose broken engagement was a widely spread rumor. He wasn't interested in the wedding, and according to rumors, he was happy about the cancellation, which infuriated the imperial family. Now, understanding the tension in the royal family, Genecia decided this man might understand her with a satisfied expression after drinking tea. She decided she would soon visit the second prince. The following night was unusually quiet. Not even the wind could be heard on the street. Silently opening the balcony door, someone entered Kalyan's room, leaving dark footprints. Approaching the bed, the cloaked man saw the prince's head peeking out from under the blanket. Pulling out his dagger with a furious smile on his face, he raised it over the helpless body. Driving the knife directly into His Highness's back, the assassin naively thought his job ended there. But it was unbearable for her to see how Xavier suffered because of his own family. As for her whole family died from an illness. However, not seeing blood, he lifted the blanket and only saw Kalyan's clothes. Meanwhile, the prince rose from behind and aimed his sword at the intruder's neck. Above all, the hero wanted to know who had sent the assassin to his chambers in this recap manhwa. The patience of Kalyan von Highness Giron was running thin, and the assassin better confess immediately. Sometime later, Genecia arrived at the central hall of the Ministry of Magic. Around her it was, as always, full of people, and upon entering she began to look around. The court wizard Cedric Windsor spotted her at the entrance and hurried toward her. He wanted to ask her about the magical impulse they had been discussing earlier. Handing her a book with notes from his research, the hero wanted her to describe that impulse there. Then the heroine wondered, didn't he fear she might check his project in those notes? But Cedric was sure she would never do something like that. Something Lisbeth, who was approaching, she completely agreed. The girl also thought that Genecia would never stoop to such a thing. After all, even in her student years, she became famous for her kindness and honesty, and she, an illegitimate child, was very lucky. The prince sincerely hoped she would help him without fail. Although, of course, she became much more well-known for her magical abilities, turning into the pseudo-heroine. Her friend hoped she would agree with her words. But with a cold look, Genecia chose to completely ignore that provocation. Her own mother cursed her from birth, sentencing that no one would ever love her. Everyone mocked and despised her, blaming her for bringing illness to her family. Lisbeth was the only one who genuinely approached her, becoming a beacon of light in her existence. However, that rosy reality turned out to be a mere and cruel illusion. While burning alive in the lab, the protagonist discovered the bitter truth and the harsh reality of the world. And now she abruptly withdrew her hand from the false friend, leaving her completely bewildered, not understanding what was happening. Lisbeth still hoped that Genecia would give her one more moment, longing for the protagonist's help to teach a lesson, while she had to prepare the documents for Lord Cedric. Genecia could have rejected the request, but a rather interesting idea was circling in her head. It was a lesson for the second prince, and fortunately, the court mage agreed to give it alongside the heroine upon hearing her confirmation. And then they would soon get married. But the heroine weakened too much trying to influence time itself. Lisbeth was overjoyed. She knew she couldn't resist laughing with joy, thinking the heroine was truly kind. At that moment, her alarm went off, and saying goodbye to everyone, she hurried to her obligations. Rushing out to the balcony, she ran to the meeting point, hoping not to be late. The lady had dedicated too much time to those two, and the hero might have left hiding behind a column. Lisbeth sighed in relief upon seeing Xavier there. Approaching him, she cheerfully greeted His Highness, who was also happy to see her. She also thanked him a lot for the embroidered handkerchief with his signature design, completely blushing. The young woman thought maybe she had gone a bit overboard, but the prince thought it was beautiful. It reminded him so much of his mother. Convinced that fate brought them together, he hoped the lady would dedicate a moment to him listening on the bench, to the story of their last encounter with Genecia. He feigned surprise. Xavier thought the heroine was cold, as if she didn't need a prince like him. Completely confused, Lisbeth understood that she hadn't been wrong before. But if she succeeded this time, she was sure that she and the prince would find a cure for her. Apparently, Genecia had no idea how to treat His Highness. What a shame. What irritated the girl the most was when Genecia flaunted the Prince Xavier. Once the heroine showed her a little box, a personal gift from the prince for Genecia, it was proof of love and care. So Lisbeth decided to snatch it away. Now she felt pity for Xavier, so good with the heroine and so mistreated. If she were the friend, she would have never acted so ignorantly with him taking the prince's hands, intrigued to know what the lady would do in that case. Sighing languidly, Lisbeth was ready to do anything Her Highness asked that very day. In the prince's salon at the Winter Palace, Cedric and Genevieve were getting ready for the lesson. The court magician decided to advise the young woman that it was essential to consider the second prince. He fought against monsters at the border, and surprisingly, the battle was without casualties. Kellyan returned without a single scratch, which is why many call him the devil himself, and the knights of the court venerate him as a swordsman. Gathering her thoughts, she staggered to the desk, pressing a napkin against her nose. Suddenly, the doors opened, and the prince entered the salon accompanied by his loyal servants. Immediately, the order was given to greet His Highness the second Prince Giron, after which the protagonist bowed respectfully before him. Cedric introduced himself as the instructor for the day, while Genevieve would be his assistant. The hero did not react to his words, fixing his cold gaze on the heroine, smiling. She knew that man wouldn't be easy, but that was exactly what she was looking for. The lesson began, and Cedric embarked on a long monologue about magical art, ignoring every word. The hero had already lost count of how many times they tried to kill him. Would this ever end? Meanwhile, according to the court magician, the most difficult element to control was earth. Only 9 magicians could master it. Lady Lembrush was one of them. Upon hearing this, the prince looked up thoughtfully. He stared at the heroine, and to his surprise, Genevieve winked at him with a smile, pointing at something. Confused, Kellyan realized she wanted him to look down. Looking at the table in front of him, he saw a book. Soon, her best friend rushed toward her, who didn't understand why Genecia was still in her lab. The heroine froze. Noticing a rolled-up piece of paper between his pages, after reading what it contained, he decided to cancel the classes for today. Convinced of how fascinating it would be, he ordered Lady Lambert to follow him, and she complied. The protagonist was glad it was easy. He suddenly stopped, and she bumped into him, her glasses falling to the ground. Kellyan thought he could ignore the note, but he was backed into a corner. The prince was perplexed by her question. Tired of the attacks, smiling, Genecia wanted to propose a deal to His Highness while picking up her glasses. She decided she would protect him from the attacks in exchange for pretending they had a real romance, coughing in embarrassment. Why had she chosen him specifically? It turned out it was all because he was an intelligent, cold, and cruel man. In other words, he was exactly the type that the lady was looking for so diligently. The heroine was not interested in love or marriage, nor did she want people using her magic. Instead, she just wanted to study magic and dedicate her life to it. All she wanted from His Highness was protection for exactly 1 year. The prince still didn't understand how she was going to stop the imminent attacks. Lisbeth couldn't be there, and her friend wanted to go up and have some hot tea later in the Lembrush mansion's parlor. Upon hearing that she could predict them with magic, the hero was already thinking about it, but they didn't give him a clear answer. However, the prince simply didn't ask Genecia that question directly before his time travel. Kellyan lost his right hand during an explosion after 167 attacks. He finally turned to the Ministry of Magic and ordered them to make him a safety device. But if they couldn't do anything before now, the story will be different. Genecia forged the magical ring she wanted to give him with her own hands in case danger lurked. The gem would emit a crimson glow as a warning. The prince wouldn't lose anything by taking it, and she just hoped for a chance. With that said, she left, and instantly her guards entered the room along with the servants. They heard everything and thought it was a very shady offer. They distrust wizards, believing they'd stab a dagger at the slightest opportunity. The warriors wanted to kick her out, but they were ordered to follow her. Their eyes showed no fear, only an unbreakable determination. Besides, there was something familiar about that sorceress, something that urged him to trust her. She discovered that the heroine was still working on the time travel spell, seeing her skin pale as chalk and her lifeless gaze. Besides, she was right to say he had nothing to lose. So why not give it a shot while walking through the palace? Genecia thought he wasn't as terrible as she expected. At least this guy listened to her, unlike all the other hypocrites suddenly. Xavier and Lisbeth appeared in front of her at the same time, making her shudder. It turns out the pseudo-friends found out about her meeting with the second prince and came here hoping she was okay. They learned of this meeting from Cedric, who, lost in his worries, bumped into them by chance, not understanding why they were still standing there. The prince invited his friends and the senator for tea, deciding to brag that he had secured the garden with magic, and that now the blue roses bloomed all year round. The court wizard understood that maintaining a garden like that must be very expensive. But according to the prince, money didn't matter to him at all. Sipping tea calmly, the protagonist understood those words were a lie. Since Xavier spent all his money on himself, he was so obsessed with impressing everyone with his giant palace that he completely forgot about the estate. All of this ended in serious money problems. And in the end, the luxurious prince turned out to be a flop. Her friend knew Genecia was totally absorbed in her work. The heroine thought that Her Highness was very upset about this since it had been a long time since she last visited. The situation reached such a point that he couldn't even pay the salary of his own servants, giving a discreet kick to Xavier. Lisbeth thought this beautiful palace said a lot about its owner. She was amazed at how lucky she was, her precious friend with her beloved. Considering Genecia incredibly fortunate, the lady also wished to meet someone like His Highness. After those words, Cedric jumped from his seat and ran away, pretending he remembered something important. Smiling, the prince recalled that his future fiancé could control 4 elements and was a star at the academy. The lady remembered all the student years of her friend who, according to her, only knew magic. All her classmates envied her and completely ignored her existence, so the girl was always alone. But everything changed completely. When she and Lisbeth became friends, Genecia remembered accidentally overhearing a conversation of her friend with other students, who didn't understand why she hung out with a witch. It turned out that Lisbeth simply didn't want the protagonist to curse others for hurting her upon hearing that she hung out with her for the common good. The protagonist was stunned. Magical and spitting blood from her mouth, the heroine was late again. The girl was pale after so many experiments. Lisbeth decided she shouldn't take it to heart. She was the most famous mage in Chiron and a role model. Thanking her kind words, Genecia remembered they had known each other for 10 years. Since then, she suspected her friend had some hidden motive but constantly turned a blind eye. She knew she was insignificant in his eyes, and now Genecia wouldn't tolerate it in silence anymore. The protagonist remembered how they always worked together on experiments, and how Lisbeth struggled against changes. The lady was always surrounded by friends, to whom she could ask for help, but didn't. Genecia felt pleased to be the only one who could help her friend at the academy, although there were also a couple of classmates who thought the witch was just wasting her time. With a smile and a sip of tea, the protagonist was sure Lisbeth remembered them. She was referring to those two guys she was dating at the same time. Flustered by embarrassment and shock, the girl jumped out of her seat and hit the table. That couldn't be true, laughing nervously. She thought their relationships barely crossed paths, and Genecia must be confused. Her whole body trembling, she didn't understand how the protagonist dared to say that in front of Her Highness with a forced giggle. Since the academy, according to her best friend, it was time for her to acknowledge her status and achievements. The protagonist rushed to pretend that maybe something had mixed up in her head, deciding that everyone makes mistakes sometimes. The prince invited the ladies to take a stroll through the garden. He walked ahead with his future fiancée, while Lisbeth followed, dragging her feet. Grinding her teeth in anger, she couldn't understand how Genecia dared to do that walking with her head held high. The protagonist had apparently completely forgotten her place, so determined to remind her sweet friend of her insignificance. The lady was sure that Genecia would never outshine her in the past during an alchemy class. Lisbeth's potion exploded suddenly. Catastrophe. Everyone immediately pitied her and blamed the heroine, considering her a nobody. Remembering that she had caused illness in her family, everyone believed Genecia broke the tube on purpose. However, all the heroine did was carefully advise her not to mix those potions. But every time she received this advice, Lisbeth thought her friend was looking down on her and did everything the opposite. Suddenly, the lady stepped up to defend her, stating that Genecia didn't do it on purpose. What innocence! Finishing her tea, the girl no longer wanted to bother her friend with her presence, and decided to leave suddenly. Now the heroine understood that her friend had tried her best to make her suffer. How cruel! And now she surely wanted revenge for having reminded her of those guys at the tea party with the prince. Putting a hand on her shoulder, the girl wanted to say something, but Genecia brusquely shoved her away. What tension after twisting her ankle! Lisbeth fell to the ground right in front of her and got on all fours. Upon seeing a partially erased magical rune under her, the girl was perplexed. She didn't understand. Could this be the spell the prince bragged about? Suddenly the rune flickered, and all the blue roses that Xavier admired so much turned into common red ones. Seeing this, the hero fell into great confusion and turned pale with horror, scared by his appearance. Lisbeth jumped up and tried to justify herself by approaching her. The heroine didn't want Her Highness to pressure the girl, since she surely didn't do it on purpose. Turning with a smile towards her fake friend, she hoped it truly had been an accident. The prince reluctantly accepted that there were no problems, and Genesis knew he would understand everything. Lisbeth had nothing to worry about. The heroine felt a scent coming from Lisbeth that was very familiar to her. The friend was surprised, since there was nothing that couldn't be bought. The prince was rich, and the heroine was sure he'd restore the rune in days. Laughing cheerfully, she was delighted that everything was resolved so easily alone with Lisbeth Xavier. She remembered his words that he would do anything for her, and now sincerely hoped he wasn't referring to this prank with that. Horrified by his words, the girl screamed, considering the situation absurd and a misunderstanding. Because even if you thought about it logically, how could a rune be erased so easily? She was sure Genecia had been behind this, incriminating her yelling in response. The prince considered those words nonsense, since that clumsy idiot would never stoop to that. Suddenly a terrifying idea struck Lisbeth, and she recalled that the heroine hadn't been herself lately. She had the feeling she had become a completely different person, which gave her chills, remembering that Genecia had abruptly rejected his courtship. The prince could only agree with the lady. Wishing to help him uncover the truth, Lisbeth planned to keep an eye on her friend at the ministry and report any oddities. The heroine sensed a familiar scent coming from Lisbeth, and her friend was surprised. The young woman hoped that Xavier would trust her with this matter, which she would dedicate herself to with total seriousness. Looking at her, the prince involuntarily remembered an event that happened a few months ago when a grand banquet was held at the imperial palace, and the hall was full of guests. Seeing Genecia among them, he didn't understand what she was doing there, that clumsy girl, and how the hell her mere presence took away Xavier's appetite. And he even had a glass of good wine in his hand. Noticing her fixed gaze on the heroine, a certain lord assumed that Her Highness had an eye for talent. That modest lady was the youngest mage among the courtiers, and also the most powerful. Most mages can only control one of the 4 elements. But oh, surprise! The heroine mastered all the elements at once. A wonder. She didn't even need magical gems to draw runes. And she also made a wooden prosthesis for the lord. Upon learning that she is a star in the magical world, Xavier knew she was the one. The emperor decreed that if the bastard finds a way to return to the past, he will be my successor. And apparently Genecia Lembrecht was the person who would help him bend time. which is why he gladly accepted Lisbeth's proposal to spy on the heroine to find out what she was plotting. She thought Lisbeth had overdone it with the perfume, but in reality, Genecia simply recognized the aroma. Taking her by the hands, he was willing to trust her completely. But only this once. Meanwhile, the heroine was happily skipping to her laboratory, humming a song. It was enough to work a little on the rune in advance and everything would go smoothly. Feeling a great relief suddenly, she saw someone at the entrance of her research center with their face hidden under a hood. Genecia, not understanding what they wanted, approached the stranger, believing he had arrived at the right place. The boy smiled, turned to her and removed his hood. As he did, the heroine, to her astonishment, recognized him instantly and was totally bewildered. The blonde with golden eyes named Manuel was a member of the Academy's youth field team. She was happy about this long-awaited meeting. Later, sitting at the table, she handed him an ice cream and discovered a surprise. The second prince had sent him to spy on her. His proposal to Kellyanne was quite unusual, and likely had hidden motives that she needed to figure out. Only trusted mages can enter the ministry, and the protagonist was the only mage close to the second prince. The heroine didn't expect him to believe her right away, but a spy doesn't reveal their true intentions just like that. Hearing that it was a perfume with a dry rose scent, the heroine felt a deep shock recalling her last birthday. Of course, that wasn't true. And normally Manuel shouldn't have been discovered under any circumstances, but he thought it was different with her and confessed his doubts to his lord. Kellyanne allowed him to reveal himself to Genecia, but on the condition that he inform her of everything down to the tiniest detail. Upon hearing that, the heroine realized it was an excellent opportunity to prove her worth and decided to confess that she was now studying restoration magic. But Manuel knew that no one had succeeded in it, yet suddenly Genecia restored right before his eyes. The ice cream he had eaten earlier technically wasn't restoration, but rather a time travel, and she deduced it when she teleported herself. The hero was amazed that her talent and creativity had been enough to invent something like that. Not all mages were capable of that, and so he hoped that his old friend would intercede for her with the Lord. Looking at her with a smile, the hero understood that she remained as wonderful as ever. Later, Manuel discovered that she had changed faculties quite quickly thanks to Lord Windsor. Meanwhile, Genecia, Xavier had given his fiancée exactly that same perfume, claiming it was made exclusively for the imperial family. Saw a sword and found out that the hero was trained by the unmatched swordmaster Kellyanne. Realizing how much he respected his highness, he internally compared it to a puppy's love for its master. But besides his lord, he also felt a sincere respect for the heroine, which puzzled her a bit. She remembered that her older brother Lopez was the true star of the Sieta family for being in the shadow of her brother. Manuel was very quiet and even gloomy during his time at the academy, but he was actually quite cheerful. And now he wondered why Genecia didn't improve her eyesight with magic. The glasses didn't bother her at all, and he didn't understand the question. But it turned out he just wanted to see her without them. Upon seeing the heroine's face, he suddenly blushed and decided they should go eat something. Soon, they were in the ministry's dining hall, and Genecia decided to invite her spy friends, serving him a bunch of meat dishes. She wanted him to eat well and regain his strength. However, they had barely started eating when suddenly Lisbeth approached them with a plate of salad. The heroine was really shocked by his appearance. She thought he wouldn't come within 1 meter after the incident in the garden. So now, lost in great confusion, Genecia wanted to know where her friend had gotten that perfume. Confused because her friend was eating without her, Lisbeth was also astonished to see the protagonist with a mischievous smile. She wondered if His Highness Xavier knew that his fiancée was having lunch with another man. Unbothered, Genecia stuffed a piece of meat into her mouth, and she decided that she didn't care at all. Very puzzled by her response, the girl didn't understand why he was acting so rude after greeting the young woman. Manuel VII hurried to clarify that from now on he would assist Lady Limbrege. In turn, Lisbeth decided that she would also be an assistant, and since he was younger than Genecia, she would treat him like a subordinate. But in the hero's opinion, since they were both assistants, they should treat each other formally. Having heard about Lord Lopez VII's impeccable manners, the girl couldn't say the same about his younger brother. Manuel thought that if she wanted to build ties with the Seven, she would have better luck with his brother since it was easier to get along with him. Besides, it must be burned into her mind that Lord should be treated with respect. With clenched teeth from anger, Lisbeth was courteous to that unfortunate guy, just because he was part of the Sieta family. On top of that, he has been eating terribly lately, and Genecia dares to stuff herself like that, looking at her friend with a smile. Very puzzled by her reaction, Lisbeth thought she had really overdone it with the perfume. She thought that with that diet she would easily gain weight, deciding that the best thing was to eat salad. She emptied the contents of her plate onto hers. At first she thought about keeping it to herself, but she was willing to share it with her friend at that moment. A knife flew by her side and embedded itself in the table, horrifying Lisbeth as she observed his behavior. The protagonist was completely disappointed in the Kendall family. From now on, he must know that leftover food was always left only for the slaves, which is why they decided to leave the food for the lady at the table and go snack on something in the lab, as they left Manuel. Decided that Lisbeth needed to learn how to behave in society, after grabbing some sandwiches. They sat at the table in the lab, and the hero apologized for his lack of control in his words. He also discovered that the heroine had proposed marriage to the second prince, for whom he felt embarrassed and hurt for not being someone she could ask for help. Therefore, the hero decided to do everything possible for her to make a deal with His Highness. Sometime later, Manuel handed the Lord the latest report on the surveillance conducted, and managed to find out that Genecia, she had terrible dark circles under her eyes and felt awful with Xavier, who trusted that his fiancée could reverse time. Thinking that somewhere else they simply sold similar perfumes, the heroine was glad that both of them liked the same scents. Wants to reject Prince Xavier before he proposes marriage. As for the hero, he had known her since the academy, and considered Lady Lembre a wonderful person inside and out, besides all the wizards. Manhwa respected Genecia more than anyone. The second prince was impressed with these serenades, hoping reality would match them. Just at that moment, a maid entered with a bang, bringing wine to his highness. Behind her was a hidden knife vial. The ring on Calian's finger began to glow crimson, recalling the words of the heroine. He immediately ordered Manuel to close all the doors upon hearing that they had a mercenary. The maid was completely baffled, unsheathing his sword with a smile. The prince also ordered to inform Genecia that their deal was done, and soon he would visit her. Lisbeth was always the center of attention, while the heroine was considered a mere afterthought. Taking advantage of this, she looked even more beautiful beside her friend, and received much love and gifts. Genecia also provided her with any magical item. All it took was a request. Once the girl hinted to her friend about a new, very happy with her words, the friend immediately hugged Genecia, causing her a tired smile. Workshop that had opened near the Lembrec mansion. A few days later, Lisbeth received a large amount of new dresses from her as a gift, and believed fervently that the protagonist was completely useless before she arrived. But now she had crossed the line, and the girl did not intend to be so lenient anymore. Lisbeth was no longer satisfied with just taking Prince Xavier from her. Now she wanted to go further. She intended to take everything from her friend, so that she would have no choice but to crawl back to her. Upon learning that Manuel had become Genecia's assistant, the prince was very perplexed. He did not understand if the protagonist had changed her mind about him for another man. But he didn't care, because no insignificant aristocrat compared to his royal self. That's why he wanted to hear all the news again, to reconsider everything and start acting. Meanwhile, upon learning that His Highness Calian had accepted the deal, Genecia was absolutely delighted. She thought that without Manuel, she surely wouldn't have succeeded. But he was confident that it was his ring that had pleased the prince. Upon hearing the knock at the door, they thought it was surely the second prince. Wishing her sweet friend a good rest, the lady hurried to leave her, closing her eyes peacefully after that. But suddenly, a voice announced the arrival of Prince Xavier, who wished to see Lady Lembrish. Not understanding what he was doing there, the protagonist was shocked by his sudden visit. She went to meet him, while the crowd gathered, wondering which bride they were talking about. Genecia couldn't be his fiancée, unless she had slipped a love potion into the tea. After greeting His Highness, the protagonist wanted to know the reason for his visit. To her astonishment, Xavier, instead of answering, knelt down and looked her straight in the eyes, extending a small box with a ring. He wanted to propose to the protagonist. Upon hearing his promise to make her happy, a shiver ran down Genecia's spine. Feeling dizzy, she didn't understand why everything was happening so suddenly. Back then, his words were the same, and she gave herself completely and even more. But in the end, Xavier discarded her mercilessly, breaking her heart and soul. And now she couldn't accept the ring from His Highness, since she wanted to marry only for love. Completely astonished by such words, the prince opened his eyes wide at Genecia, the protagonist. The heroine remembered that rose scent again. Every time she perceived it, she thought of Xavier, who taught her to love. She decided to clarify that not only did she not love him, but the prince's love was also not sincere, calmly starting to turn away. She hoped he wouldn't do such things again, which made Xavier completely lose it, deciding he shouldn't even try. Underestimating her feelings for her, the prince already knew about her secret lover, quite perplexed by her words. She didn't understand anything at all, but according to Lisbeth, she had to stop that farce. The young woman, just like her highness, knew what Lady Lumbers was doing behind the prince's back, and as her friend, she couldn't keep quiet upon hearing that she was sneaking around with the lord's brother and deceiving decent Xavier. Genecia was very bewildered. The crowd instantly judged her for her double romance supporting Lisbeth. They didn't understand that men only found things in her and longed for her punishment. The false friend wanted apologies, but she loved another, and they were already promised. Besides, Prince Xavier never courted her. How could she betray someone who was nothing? His Highness pleaded for a chance. To call that courting was madness. Xavier was going insane. And now her best friend Lisbeth also came to mind, who always helped and supported her. Genecia was sure that without them she wouldn't make it. He roared and raised his hand against the shameless woman. Calian blocked the blow and demanded explanations from his stepbrother for his attack. How dare that idiot touch his fiancé? Xavier was perplexed, considering the prince a beast. He recalled his month of conquest at Embrec, unsuccessfully learning of the harassment towards his fiancée. Calian was furious and lunged at the prince. Terrified of his stepbrother, Xavier demanded that the heroine explain herself once and for all. Approaching her, the second prince also wanted Genecia to reveal to everyone their first encounter. Specifically, she had to show the ring and name him in front of the whole crowd. There present and realizing she had no other option, the heroine believed she had to overcome this small obstacle. Showing the ring to everyone, she pretended they had met in Cedric's class, and Calian had declared his feelings that same day. According to him, it was true love at first sight, and fate itself had brought them together in that precise spot. Xavier was so shocked that it even affected the quality of his drawing. What a horror! The equally ungraceful Lisbeth was stunned that such a heartless scoundrel had fallen in love at first sight. And that's why she wanted to meet their expectations. For that, she needed to focus completely on the research and gather her ideas. Calian himself remained completely unperturbed, implying with all his being that this was how it happened. Later, sitting in front of him in the carriage, Genecia expressed her sincere gratitude to His Royal Highness. It turns out Manuel notified him just in time, and the second prince arrived immediately, Besides, they agreed to use informal terms, so the protagonist could now call him by his name. They were now heading to the Lembrage mansion to collect her things. And then together to the Winter Palace. Genecia was very surprised by his words, and didn't understand the reason for all this. Then the hero reminded her of the promise to protect him from all assassination attempts. This in turn means they would spend the whole year together. The protagonist, of course, remembered her promise perfectly, but saw no need for it. In response, Kalyan decided to ask her if she knew when people usually let their guard down without a second thought. She decided that this happens during lunchtime, but according to the second prince, it happens while sleeping. So Genecia had to protect him precisely at that moment, knowing they would sleep in the same bed and under the same blanket. She knew it could only mean one thing. She stayed seated at the desk until late at night doing complex calculations, the heroine. That's why the protagonist decided to clarify immediately what would happen if she hogged the blanket while sleeping, completely stunned by her question. Kalyan wanted to know if she was hiding an ace up her sleeve, but didn't expect to hear anything about the blanket, smiling thoughtfully. He considered that his fiancée was much more interesting than he had initially thought. He also became convinced of the truth of the report that said she was a brilliant mage, though clumsy in everything else. Deciding to return to the discussion, he remembered that the wife of a royal member had to master poetry, history, and philosophy. She also had to be an expert swordswoman, an excellent rider, and know the protocol inside out. In general, she had to live up to the imperial family. And since her arrival at the Winter Palace, Genecia would begin her training. They used this as an excuse to take her there. But for the protagonist, everything she heard was too unfamiliar. However, Kalyan considered her the most intelligent mage in the entire empire, so she would master everything in a matter of days. Knowing that he was just trying to encourage her, Genecia decided to give it her all. According to the prince, they had to. Finally, she found the cause of past failures. With the idea that this time everything would go well, she hurried to her lab to check the theory. Communicate more freely, so that people would think they were crazy for each other. Soon, they arrived at the gates of the Lemberg mansion, where the butler was already waiting for them. To the heroine's great surprise, Kalyan was going to accompany his fiancée to the house. As they got out of the carriage with him, she imagined Lance's face when he found out everything. Once outside, the hero extended his hand carefully, hoping she would take it, blushing from embarrassment. Genecia took his hand, and the prince respectfully guided her forward. Upon seeing this scene, Lance was stunned by the sight, unable to believe what he was seeing. Entering the house, the heroine pushed him aside, and after the explanations, she hoped he would help pack. They didn't have much time, and the butler wanted to hand her something. It was a list of 105 mages chosen by the Magic Tower that Lady Lambersh fervently desired. In our tier, they requested more funds to thoroughly examine 3 mages from that list. The investigation was crucial. Fully trusting the guild, Genecia ordered to allocate more funds. However, when she went down to the basement, she froze in front of the entrance. The door was ajar, and conveyed that she herself would give them a bonus. Lance obediently accepted the order but couldn't understand what the real purpose of all this was. It turns out that his lady simply decided to be herself, and now, oh surprise, she was the betrothed of the second prince, but also yearned to be a member of the Magic Tower. And once everything was over, she would dedicate her life to magic. A noble dream. The butler had already noticed a change in her, but now it was undeniable. Something had blossomed. Her precious lady had transformed into a beautiful and radiant young woman, a sight worthy of admiration. At the same time, he clearly understood that not everything would be easy, that sometimes she would stumble upon obstacles. Life is like that, sometimes problems must resolve themselves, and Genecia no longer wanted to take the easy path. A new direction was coming that very night. The carriage with the heroes arrived without incidents at the gates of the Winter Palace. They were greeted by the personal assistant of His Highness and butler, a certain Rupert Bolton. After solemnly greeting the distinguished guest, he pierced her with a penetrating gaze. But the most alarming thing was the light burning inside. Approaching the door silently, she was in shock. This caught the heroine off guard, who wasn't expecting something like that and was totally confused. According to the prince, from that moment on, Rupert would be her personal assistant. After ordering the butler to show her around, Kalyan also wanted him to start giving her lessons tomorrow. Genecia already sensed that Rupert hated her, but she confirmed it upon seeing mountains of books on the table. He expected the heroine not to shut up. If problems arose, he would always be willing to inform the lord about her. In the past, they had treated Genecia even worse, and that didn't scare her. But why this hostility from the very beginning? Did he despise her like everyone else, just for being a bastard? Remembering that in a year her paths would part from the prince, she decided to find out if the butler was going too far. It turns out that the hero still didn't trust the lady, as not everyone knows about the attacks against His Highness. Then Genecia understood that she wasn't the problem. She simply worried about Kalyan. Apparently His Highness had the affection of many people. Understanding his doubts, the protagonist would have acted exactly the same in his place. But now she needed the prince and sincerely wished for him to have a long and happy life. Besides, she promised to work hard while she was there, so Genecia decided firmly that she wouldn't leave the office. For him to ascend to the throne, he needed to go back to the past, as even His Majesty desired it. Seeing her fiancé and her best friend inside, the prince didn't understand why they had to go through all this when they could, until she memorized all those books. After several hours of hard work, her soul nearly left her exhausted body. While the butler was in shock, the protagonist was immensely happy to have answered everything. Deciding to rest a bit before the other classes, she still didn't know where her room was. In the end, the prince arrived personally, and taking the sleeping beauty in his arms, he carried her to his chamber. Upon waking and seeing him, she was very surprised, taking the sleeping beauty in his arms, he carried her to his bedroom. Upon waking and seeing him, she was very surprised, Kalyan thought she was too tired, thinking it was a dream. Genecia had memorized 40 books and was indeed exhausted, deciding that Rupert had gone too far with the training the hero planned to give him a lesson. But suddenly the heroine defended the butler, who was simply very worried about his master. The prince still didn't know how she knew about the attacks, and apparently she knew about his request for help to the Ministry of Magic. Finding herself in bed, Genecia envied Kalyan greatly, whom so many people looked after. The heroine decided that if someone treated her like that, she'd be in heaven. Simply steal the records from the witch with the research in the meantime, completely blissful, wrapping her in a blanket and taking off her glasses. The hero noticed for the first time how beautiful the lady was. At breakfast, the prince observed his fiancée and ordered Manuel to relieve her so she could have the day off. He knew she had worked late the night before and believed a break would do her wonders. Clarifying that he would cancel the appointment with the tailor, he received a look full of questions. He suddenly remembered that according to Rupert the tailor, was supposed to visit her today as part of her training. Kalyan decided that being engaged to a prince, she should dress according to her position. Evoking past teasing, she loudly remembered that she had never been interested in fashion. The hero was very surprised by her reaction. Thinking he had said something inappropriate, he immediately apologized for his clumsiness, assuring her that he didn't think she had bad taste. Genecia hadn't planned to express those thoughts, but they slipped out unintentionally, and now she felt awkward despite the rumors about the terrible second prince. Kalyan turned out to be very kind and considerate. The protagonist knew that he wasn't the type to embarrass someone on purpose. Later, they encountered two dressmakers, who cheerfully greeted the young lady in their boutique. They only made refined and elegant handmade dresses. Putting the test tubes from the table into a bag, Lisbeth decided that would have been too cruel. Genecia would be devastated by the loss of the notes. And the shop is the best in the Empire for ladies. It was a great honor to introduce the protagonist to some of their work and led her to the dresses brought meanwhile. Rupert took the gentleman some important documents that needed urgent review, understanding that he was busy. Genecia followed the ladies to the fitting room. The huge fitting room was filled with elegant outfits, expensive shoes, and shiny accessories. Surrounding the protagonist from all sides, the dressmakers began to take her measurements at lightning speed. Moreover, with her permission, they hurried to take the young lady's glasses off. Seeing her eyes without glasses, the ladies considered her a diamond in the rough, whose sight needed urgent correction. Completely confused, Genecia had never received compliments of that magnitude. After a brief wait, the ladies presented the heroine before Her Highness, apologizing for the delay. The lady's amethyst eyes perfectly complemented her aquamarine dress. That image struck deep into Kalyan's soul, becoming the seed of a burning love. Not understanding Her Highness's silence, Genecia's vision blurred without her glasses, and she didn't have much time left. Xavier, thinking that she was too good to the heroine, started harassing her, enjoying the scent of dried roses. The dressmakers were more amazed than anyone. They didn't need to work hard to beautify her, determined to try on another dress. The seamstresses were more amazed than anyone. They didn't need to put in any effort to make her look beautiful, determined to try on another dress. Kalyan soon beheld a completely new angelic image after another change of clothes. The seamstresses couldn't understand how everything could look so good on one person after several more dresses. The heroine couldn't take it anymore and decided to end the trial. Then the prince decided to buy all the dresses, even the ones she hadn't tried on. Confounding the butler, Rupert remembered that His Highness had never been interested in expensive clothes or trinkets. Genecia saw no need for so many dresses. They wouldn't even look good on her. Kalyan smiled, thinking that absolutely everything looked amazing on her. Very blushing, the heroine remembered that he seemed to be busy with something. It turns out the hero was planning to take care of certain matters before the tournament. Hearing this, she remembered it was the most popular festival in the Empire, biannual. This time, due to the attack on Kalyan Jurgen, the first prince won and Nia came in second. Turns out she put on perfume while His Highness was still sleeping. The prince decided that a beauty like Lisbeth. But the most surprising thing was that Xavier took home the bronze. Genecia felt curious. Who decides the order of the tournament competitions? Besides, she thought the explosion was an accident. But what if someone wanted to harm the second prince? Knowing that all the princes would draw lots by age, she decided to participate for him. It was all to protect him. And seeing her, Kalyan was willing to trust his life to his fiancée. It turned out it was today, and she, along with the prince, headed to the main palace, walking down the hallway. She didn't understand why it was so frightfully cold in the central palace of the Empire. According to the second prince, the cold was magical, necessary to slow the decomposition of the bodies. She decided they would leave right after the drawing, and Genecia totally agreed. It turned out that all the other princes had already arrived and were waiting in the hall. Upon entering, they saw the third prince, Vikas, the fifth prince, Kazan, and the first prince, Jurgen. Also present was the fourth prince, Xavier, who immediately stared at the newcomers. Holding hands and approaching calmly, the protagonist felt a strong tension in the air, seeing their confusion. Kalyan looked at his fiancée with understanding, wanting to protect her at all costs after cheerfully greeting his dear brother. This scent suited her much better than Genecia. Unable to take it anymore, the heroine walked into the lab determined. Jurgen was also happy to see his fiancée and decided that the hero's taste in women had changed, and his current fiancée was much more boring than Lady Derek in this recap manhwa. Genesis didn't understand why he was staring at her while the first prince thought that maybe they were missing something. Fed up with their antics, Kalyan grabbed his brother by the head and slammed it against the ground with all his might. Jurgen seemed to have completely forgotten how much the hero hated it when someone insulted someone from his people. While the first prince recovered from the shock, Vika jumped up furiously from his seat. Starting to yell at Kali and looking at him fiercely, the second prince ordered him to control his tongue. Paralyzed by his gaze, both princes fell silent, scared, turning as white as a sheet. Watching them leave, Xavier laughed at those idiots who had provoked Kali and themselves. After a deep sigh and looking at the second prince, Jurgen didn't realize who he was messing with thanks to this man, the heroine. She was able to leave the Ministry of Magic without the slightest fuss. Suddenly feeling his fixed gaze, the fourth prince shuddered from head to toe. Dropping the book with the research notes completely confused, she didn't understand what those two were doing there. Meanwhile, with the first and third princes absent, the Chamberlain decided to draw a card for them. But Genecia decided to participate in the draw instead of her husband. The servant didn't like the idea at all, but he had no choice but to invite her to the table with a smile. There were several cards that defined the order of the dance, and one had to be chosen by reaching out to the table. The heroine discreetly used magic to see them all. To her great surprise, all the cards turned out to be absolutely identical. Remembering that the explosion would occur during the dance, and understanding that everything was planned, she decided which card to choose. But when she touched them, whoops, she accidentally swept them off the table at that moment. The Chamberlain's face contorted in terror, and he stood frozen staring at her. With a smile, Genecia was horrified by how clumsy she was. Almost all the cards flipped over and everyone saw their numbers, and the silence became thick. The servant was completely disoriented, and the heroine thought there was something fishy here. Looking at her in panic, the Chamberlain thought, shaking with tears and resentment, she was in shock that not only were they stealing her research, but they were also pawing at each other like animals. Definitely someone set me up. Surprised by what she heard, Genecia didn't even hint that he had arranged the cards like that. She knew that someone had enough power to bribe even the Chamberlain of the court, and that someone was none other than the first Prince Jurgen, the heir of the Empress. The heroine watched him closely, and he thought suspecting me is like suspecting the prince. After removing the eye patch, the third Prince Caesar ordered the Chamberlain to stop lying. As it was useless against his magic, the young hero's Eye of Truth was a level 3 sacred artifact, and it could unmask any lie. It wasn't entirely true, and the servant hoped that the young prince would cease his jokes knowing that Caesar was using a pretty popular toy. A clever plan arose in Genecia's mind. Expressing her deep respect for the sacred relic, she hoped that His Highness would allow her to use it a little, putting the eye patch on. She pretended that now she could see everything, and that it was truly a legendary artifact inventing everything on the fly. Supposedly, she saw a huge shield behind the Chamberlain adorned with petals, knowing that a similar shield. Looking at her indignantly, Xavier didn't understand who dared to call them animals, shouting in response. It was on the coat of arms of Prince Jurgen. Everyone concluded that he had meddled without understanding how he could know everything. The servant began to suspect that this toy actually worked, falling to his knees before the lady, the Chamberlain. He sincerely hoped that he wouldn't be exposed before His Majesty drawing his sword, the second prince. He decreed that his fiancée had to return to the Winter Palace, deciding to leave the servant with her fiancé. The heroine hurried out of the hall and later arrived at the Winter Palace greenhouse to clear her mind and think things over. Everything was too easy, but the changed cards would give Jurgen the advantage, even though an explosion wouldn't help him at all, thanks to Genecia. She felt that something important was slipping through her fingers, suddenly appearing in front of her. Manuel cheerfully greeted the heroine, suspecting she would want to get back to work right away, so he decided to warn her that the Ministry of Magic was a mess. Genecia immediately thought that Lisbel had done something again, but the problem was different. In fact, the girl immediately switched to another faculty after that incident. Genecia didn't understand how they dared to do this to her when she trusted them so much. Furious, she decided that she would never forgive those people. The hero was much more worried about the journalists that Lady Tarek had unleashed against the Ministry of Magic. She is the fiancée of His Highness Kalyan, and it seems she holds a grudge. The protagonist understood that the woman wasn't entirely wrong, yet she still irritated her. Lady Derek hoped to destroy the reputation of the second prince before the investiture ceremony. If Genecia goes back to work, all the reporters will swarm her and rumors will fly. Besides, she'll undoubtedly run into Kalyan's ex-fiancé at the investiture ceremony. Thanking Manuel for the information, she decided to prepare thoroughly for it. She also found out that fortunately Cedric was in a really good mood before this. Genecia thought he was devastated by Lisbel's switch to another faculty. It seemed to her that the court wizard had hidden feelings for the lady. But maybe that's not the case, knowing it would be a bit out of place. The hero also wanted to clarify something about the investiture ceremony, completely red with embarrassment. Manuel wanted to invite the heroine to dance. He knew the second prince would invite her to the first dance, but he hoped that in the end. That's why the prince relied on Genecia, who was the most powerful mage in the entire kingdom in this recap manhwa. However, the heroine knew that reversing time was impossible. After such a betrayal, beside herself with rage, she lunged at Lisbeth and grabbed her by the hair. She would have the energy to dance with him, seeing that no one else was asking her. Genecia understood perfectly. After all, she couldn't dance with anyone at her graduation. That time, Lisbeth showed her false compassion while receiving loads of invitations herself. But according to her friend, she didn't have to worry. After all, she was Xavier's fiancé, not wanting him to suffer too. The heroine accepted the invitation with joy. In fact, she was determined to perfect her dancing skills in practice. Dancing was harder than in theory, and Genecia regretted not having attended more events practicing that very night. She accidentally twisted her ankle and started to fall. A second later, she was in Callion's arms, who appeared out of nowhere. Seeing that she was hurrying too much, the hero took her by the waist and invited her to dance following his advice. The protagonist suddenly realized she was starting to get the hang of it. She was very afraid of embarrassing the second prince at the ceremony with her clumsy moves. In exchange for silence about the letter, the Chamberlain convinced the emperor to draw some new ones, plus Jurgen asked his mother to send a personal gift to Genecia. This means making her scream. A couple of seconds later, the protagonist received a powerful punch from her fiancé to the jaw. That if anyone dares to mock the protagonist at the ceremony, they will insult the empress. Callien did everything possible for his fiancé to simply enjoy the festivities. The night before the celebration, he healed her sight with magic, and then the dressmakers arrived. This time, Genecia wanted them to make her up until she was unrecognizable. That night, a ball was held as a prelude to the tournament. Xavier was glad that Callien revealed Jurgen's deception, because in exchange for silence, the first prince decided to do each of them a favor. Suddenly, he saw the second prince enter the banquet hall with Genecia. He and all the other guests were stunned by the young woman's majesty. Empress Theodora was also impressed by her elegance, and congratulated the heroine on her appearance. When she directed her gaze to Her Majesty, Genecia trembled in terror. The emperor did not possess magic, but he looked much younger than he was, and emanated a chilling aura. Turning her towards him, Callien wanted her to relax and lean on him. They began to dance, and soon the heroine felt that her heels were too high. The hero hoped she would sit down after the dance, but the young lady had already arranged to dance with Manuel. She flew and hit her head against the corner of the table, losing consciousness instantly. So he placed her on his feet and decided she could completely relax and just pretend to dance. Now they were too close, and Genecia feared Callien would hear the rapid beating of her heart as he watched their dance. The guests decided that this couple should be sent directly to the altar. Meanwhile, Lisbeth was set apart, watching them with envy and gritting her teeth. Her friends Meg and Selena were also shocked by such boldness and decided to help her. The ladies decided to deal with the heroine when she went to the restroom, and Lisbeth could draw Callien's attention to herself. Before, people thought the emperor forced the second prince and the sorceress to leave, but it seems that those rumors were lies. Suddenly, the heroine heard the ladies whispering that she was simply using Callien like she did with Xavier, taking advantage of the initiative. Other ladies decided that at the academy, Genecia was a heartbreaker, and the second prince surely took her by force. As she approached them to clarify things, she suddenly saw Selena in the middle of the crowd. In her past life, Meg and Lisbeth did not spare. The table wobbled and the candle on it fell, igniting the papers and causing a raging fire, watching resignedly as the manuscripts burned. Efforts to bully the heroine at the academy. But now Genecia was not going to allow anyone to humiliate Callien. She would first clarify that the fourth prince, Xavier, didn't give a damn. Besides, she loved the second prince who proposed to her with those rumors. Selena offends them both, so she better watch herself. Genecia awaited a response, but the lady simply turned around and walked away. Upon learning that she did it for him, the hero was stunned by her unpredictability as he looked at Xavier. He saw in her eyes a bitter hatred and intense jealousy, seeing that they still believed in the romance. Callien would repay her with a kiss on her curls. Trying to calm her heart at all costs, Genecia decided to go to the restroom, and as soon as she entered, Meg and Selena greeted her with joy. Suspecting her past life during the academy, they discovered through Lisbeth that she had slandered them behind their backs. Genecia never did something like that, but the ladies didn't believe her and continued tormenting her mercilessly. And now these ladies decided that she could join their club of elegant nobles. In that case, the heroine wanted them to offer her immediately. Their apologies for the past harassment. Furious at these words, Meg didn't understand. Xavier decided it was time to flee with his lover. At that moment, the heroine was starting to wake up, feeling a warm liquid running down her head. How that creature who stole Lisbeth's boyfriend dared to give them orders. Before that, they learned from Lady Kendall that Genecia was only pretending to be Xavier's fiancé and took her friend's boyfriend, and now they were there just to delay the heroine. While Lisbeth was hosting the second prince, the heroine remembered that Lady Kendall always desired what she had, and she wouldn't stop at anything to get it. However, this time, Genecia decided she wasn't going to let her have what she wanted. With a sharp bang on the table, she knocked all the bottles over and the wine spilled all over the room. Magical objects were banned at events, so Meg and Selena had nothing, creating a huge column of fire and bringing it close to the spilled alcohol. The heroine demanded. They step aside, terrified. Selena didn't recognize the loser they knew. What had happened to her? According to Genecia, her similarity was that Lisbeth had manipulated them all vilely. But the heroine wouldn't fall for it anymore, while Meg and Selena continued to be her puppets, not wanting to sit idly by. She shot a fire blast at them, but suddenly the fire went out, and a metallic taste in her mouth upon seeing Lisbeth not fleeing and heading towards her. A spark of hope shone in Genevia's eyes, but the girls were in shock, not understanding anything. Genecia could easily defeat them with magic, but didn't want to lower herself to their level. As she left, she clarified that she had never spoken about them behind their backs. Meanwhile, Manuel leaned against a garden tree, confused by what he saw at the banquet. Rupert approached to confirm if His Highness was in the garden and Lady Lambridge in the restroom. He knew that the reason for the protagonist's gloom was precisely the heroine. However, Manuel served the second prince, and shouldn't desire what belonged to his lord. But the hero opposed this, since Callian didn't even like Genecia. At that moment, the heroine burst into the garden, leaving the boys bewildered upon hearing that the second prince was in danger. They all rushed toward him together. Meanwhile, Callian encountered his uncle Richard and rejected his proposal. The count wanted to elevate his highness to the throne, but the second prince only wanted to destroy the royal family once and for all. She also understood that her uncle only wanted to use her for his own family's benefit, while pretending to really want to help. Richard reminded her that her highness's mother was from his family when Lisbeth suddenly appeared from behind a tree. Against all odds, the lady lifted a research notebook, smiling at her friend, with her feet and the edge of her dress covered in mud, respectfully greeting the gentleman. Lady Kendall had no intention of eavesdropping on their conversation. The girl even looked different from the Lisbeth Richard remembered what she would have heard. She actually hadn't heard anything, but the lady decided to pretend that she did, willing to keep quiet if Callian would accept seeing her from time to time. However, the hero looked at her with a gaze full of contempt, which puzzled her. Nervously laughing, she decided to clarify that she only wanted to know more about her best friend. A misunderstanding had recently arisen between them, and Lisbeth hoped that her highness would help them reconcile. At that moment, the heroes rushed towards the second prince, and Genecia accidentally hurt her leg. Suddenly, she saw an irritated Callian closely followed by Lady Kendall as their eyes met with the heroine. Lisbeth labeled Meg and Selena as useless idiots, and immediately pretended to have a casual encounter with the second prince, but Genecia didn't buy it. Seeing the situation slipping away, the lady tried to let a tear drop so they would feel sorry for her and blame the heroine. After thanking the heroine for all these years and for this farewell gift, the young woman returned to Xavier. But against all odds, Callian went straight to his fiancé and looked at her ankle with concern. Rupert and Manuel were ordered to take them back to the palace, while Lisbeth didn't understand why no one was looking at her suddenly. The second prince picked Genecia up in his arms and walked towards the carriage. This way he wanted to show Lady Kendall how much they loved each other, seeing the girl furious. The heroine decided that she wasn't worth his attention, and now in the prince's arms she felt terribly embarrassed. The next day, Genecia was still mentally processing everything that had happened the night before. Callian worried her greatly. She felt that he was investing more in their relationship. Rupert, sitting in front of her, clarified that the second prince would compete in the end, and that she could rest in the palace. Xavier, furious about the draw, didn't understand how his father had allowed this. Earlier, the Emperor had given him a magical amulet that activates offensive magic and boosts the user. But the fourth prince didn't expect to be paired in the same round with Callian, his right-hand man. They turned around and left quietly, leaving the betrayed sorceress in the middle of the flames, collapsing exhausted on the ground. Genecia. Jade Wiseman suggested he take care of himself for the tournament he was. His Majesty's favorite, the assistant on the other hand, was shocked by Xavier's immaturity and whimsy. A little while later, Genecia decided to inspect the tournament arena upon seeing in the pamphlet that the second and fourth princes would be in the same round. She was extremely astonished. In her previous life, when the explosion occurred, they were both in the same group. How is that possible? It was a gigantic explosion. And to provoke something like that, a rune is needed. A complex magic and a powerful source of magic suddenly heard a familiar voice behind her, ready to help the young lady. It was none other than Jade Wiseman, who was not only Xavier's right-hand man, but also a self-proclaimed rogue and a cheater. Upon learning that Genecia wanted to inspect the arena, he offered to give her a tour and help her get into the stadium. As soon as they entered the arena, the girl began to thoroughly examine the entire environment. Leaving him perplexed all of a sudden, she discovered beneath the plates magical stones of destruction enough for an explosion, but the magic rune was still missing. She felt her strength beginning to fade slowly. The fire intensified and approached her, but she decided she couldn't die like this. The guard knights couldn't stand such audacity and demanded that she stop touching everything immediately. It turned out they had been allowed in, thanks to Jade's connections, but they could be arrested for damaging property. As they left, they heard the furious shouts of the arena fighters, who couldn't understand how they could lose to a kid. The boy replied that they were all just losers, which further enraged the guys. Lord Wiseman decided to ignore him, but the heroine couldn't just stand by. Approaching the thugs, she decided they should be ashamed of their attitude. The boys didn't want trouble with the noble and fled. Genecia discovered that the boy's name was Nia Nocturne. Observing him closely, she remembered that Hero was second in the tournament in her past life. Knowing he was probably scared of the bullies, the heroine decided to take him home. Deciding to forgive her for the rescue, Nia hurried to clarify that he was a dragon and centuries older than her. Later, while buying him ice cream, she discovered that the hero was looking for his dolls. The elders of the Magic Tower promised to help him, but upon breaking their oath, Nia cut ties with them. The heroine couldn't believe they used dragons, since no one had achieved it yet, but her beloved insisted, gripping her hard by the shoulders to the point of hurting her. Gathering her last strength, she began to crawl, feeling she still had a bit of magic left, wetting a soot-blackened finger with her own blood. For their own purposes. She was the first to help them without asking for anything in return, and for that, the dragon decided to open up to her. Besides, Nia could see magic, and just by looking at Genecia, he knew she was a kind and very powerful sorceress, amazed by such ability. She hoped the dragon could help her find the rune in the arena after obtaining his consent. He took her to the Winter Palace, hoping that Nia would be allowed to stay there. Rupert's brother, who recently lost in battle against this boy, was in shock at this turn. The hero himself was happy for the girl's arrival, since His Highness couldn't wait to show off his skills to her. The second prince was very puzzled by the fact that she had managed to befriend this guy heavily. Sighing, he decided that she must have forgotten about the tournament from having fun, thinking he was upset because she wasn't fulfilling her contractual obligations. Genecia decided to be more careful moving forward, very embarrassed by his words. The hero was not referring to that at all. Suddenly, the dragon took a liking to the red-eyed prince. She began to draw a magic circle on the ground, even if it seemed unreal, who was also dying. Naya saw an object in his heart and understood that no normal person could exist like that, suddenly getting up and drawing a sword. How dare that punk say that, but seeing the heroine's gaze, he put away his weapon and decided they should chat a bit. He discovered that Genecia saw many aspects of herself in the boy. She was simply interested in talking about magic with someone who loved it as much as she did. With him, she felt for the first time that she had a true friend. Then the second prince ordered a room to be prepared for him, and decided that if Nia got into trouble, she would be the one responsible. Genecia was thrilled with what she heard, thanking Kellyan and considering him very kind the next day alone with the dragon. She hoped he would help her in her quest for the explosion activator. The heroine also wondered about the object in the second prince's heart that was mentioned yesterday. Turns out it was a stone created by the dragon Joan, with the ability to restore. According to Nia, Kellyan died once, but this object brought him back to life. She had to at least try to turn back time. She had to do it. The heroine was an illegitimate daughter in the family of the Count of Lembray. But dragons don't like to share their creations. So the hero believes the dolls he was looking for were stolen by his mother. They were also taken back then. He didn't know much about humans. He trusted the elders of the magic tower, but they deceived him. Genecia now understands that in his previous life, Jurgen also used Nia to win the tournament. That's why he now decides to offer her protection and ensure the return of his dolls. The dragon, sensing that the heroine is different from other humans, accepts the proposal. Immediately they head to the stadium where the tournament is already in full swing. The VIP room is well protected, and according to the guards, only royalty members can enter. Genecia was sure that as the second prince's fiancée, she had every right to enter. The soldiers at the entrance didn't believe her. But fortunately, Jade unexpectedly came out through the doors, confirming her words to the guards, Xavier's assistant. He hoped to have been helpful to the heroine in this recap manhwa. His hair and aura reminded him of the heroine Alice Bell, and he didn't like that at all. Nia ran forward, hoping to quickly find the necessary magical artifact upon entering. Her birth was a curse. Her mother was a maid forced to sleep with the Count, and the woman suffered from the existence of her daughter constantly hearing. Running into the room and stopping in front of the Emperor, the dragon covered his nose from the stench entering behind him. Genecia respectfully greeted the son of the Empire, throwing him an indifferent glance. His Majesty turned around and continued watching the tournament. The young woman was very amazed that he seemed even younger than in their previous encounter. Meanwhile, Nia could no longer control her gag reflex. All the magic was unique and different, just like each person's personalities. The dragon felt the heroine's magic warm, like the very sun inside the Emperor were rotting piles of all kinds of magic. And that smell made Nia sick suddenly. They announced the start of the stage in which Kellyan was to participate. The hero managed to scan the entire stadium, and many were carrying explosive objects. Not many were capable of creating so many magical artifacts at once, and surely the second prince was the target the dragon decided to ask. If he truly loved that redhead with crimson eyes, thinking he was referring to love in general, he replied that he cared for all his friends, including Nia. He noticed she was searching for a magical object everywhere for the prince. She was really worth it, the heroine, that it would have been better if she had never been born. Genecia was frequently beaten. Her mother believed that no one loved the girl and that one day wanted to clarify that they were united by a contract. But why those words didn't come out, in reality she wanted to be with Kellyan as much as possible. Even after breaking the contract, he was the kindest person she had ever met and genuinely cared about her. The hero didn't impress the dragon, but if Genecia valued him so much, he was willing to help. Touching the heroine's head with a finger, Nia gave him the ability to see the world with dragon eyes and use his magic. Meanwhile, thanks to the stone obtained, Xavier easily won the preliminary competitions. However, that object had a limit on uses, and the hero decided to save it for now. Seeing Genecia on one of the balconies, he was happy, thinking she had come to see him, following her gaze. He realized with horror that she was looking at Kellyan. The second prince didn't understand why she'd gone there. A lot of time was still left for his exit suddenly. The fourth prince decided to challenge him right there, and if he won, he would keep the heroine. Kellyan exploded in fury. Genecia was not an object to win, not determined to teach him to respect women. He accepted Xavier's challenge. The heroine looked on in horror as the stone on the fourth prince's necklace. They would simply use her and abandon her. Over time, a terrible illness wiped out the entire Lemberg family, shone brighter and filled him with power. Noticing his gaze, Xavier rejoiced. He would reclaim Genecia and fulfill his majesty's will. He launched a furious attack against the second prince, but he dodged it calmly. Seeing how he clung to the necklace with the stone, Kellyan understood. His opponent was cheating. The heroine heard Nia say that necklace would cause the explosion of the magical stones, but she knew it was a handmade gift from his majesty, made by the wizards of the tower. Meanwhile, tired of looking for the opponent's weaknesses, Kellyan decided to end him. The fourth prince was exhausted and knew he was going to lose the fight, so he decided to ask. The hero realized who the protagonist had been looking at all this time. Xavier thought she still loved him and was only using the second prince to make him jealous. He also remembered that for Kalian, it was impossible to know what love was, because he killed his own mother. At that very moment, the hero's sword grazed him. In a short period, being the only survivor, the heroine inherited the county of Lemberg, cutting his face, and the stone trembled with pain and fear. The fourth prince hoped his half-brother wouldn't kill him in front of the public. Looking at Genecia, Kalian understood they had a contract, and Xavier's words shouldn't torment him. But inside, everything suddenly burned. Magical circles appeared everywhere, and the protagonist jumped off the balcony, straight towards the second prince, catching her in his arms. He wondered at what exact moment he had started to feel something for her. Immediately after, a huge roar resonated the protagonist, used dragon magic, and created barriers around them, thanks to which they were unharmed. The ground absorbed all the magic from the stone Xavier, and the explosion was even greater than expected. With a sad look at Genecia, Kalian decided he shouldn't take such risks for the contract. Smiling in response, she would protect him even without an agreement. A week passed, and by order of the Emperor, they stopped searching for the culprit and covered up the case. Besides, since then, the protagonists feel uncomfortable with each other. Meanwhile, Rupert met Nia and decided to give her a task. He handed over the money from His Highness. Remembering the cremation of her disfigured relatives due to the illness, Genecia understood that her life had always been unbearable, and the dragon was to take Genecia for a walk. Soon they found themselves in the middle of a bustling market, seeing a huge black store. Nia decided to go in. It turned out that the place belonged to a witch who sold her potions. Until now, the heroine had only read about this in books. It was an incredible discovery to find that one of the bottles contained a love potion. She decided to buy it no matter what. Another buyer wanted the same thing, but Genecia was faster and snatched it away. Suddenly, the stranger recognized the heroine. It was Lady Belowisterek, the ex-fiancée of Kalian. Later in a cafe, she recalled when she woke up and discovered she was the fiancée of the second prince. Her father sold her to gain the Empress's trust, so she herself went to see His Highness with a proposal. By handing them her father's secret book, Lady Tarek gained protection and the option to break the engagement. All this time, she had been hiding in Rupert's house, and today she was going to leave when she ran into the heroes. Since things turned out this way, she hoped Genecia wouldn't refuse to give her the love potion. The heroine took it just out of curiosity and didn't plan to use it on Kalian, so she accepted, delighted. Suddenly, she felt a strange sensation, and the heat of the flames began to fade gradually. Her head no longer hurt, but Beloise suddenly refused. It was more romantic to win someone over than to get them drunk, he thought. After his departure, the protagonist returned to the Winter Palace, finding her at the entrance. The second prince hoped that Genecia would spare him a moment. He recalled Xavier's words about how she still felt something for him. His Highness knew that the fourth prince only provoked him, but noticed the heroine's gaze towards him. Now he wanted to apologize for those words about the contract. Said in a fit of rage, Genecia remembered Beloise, who saw her run towards the prince in the sand and thought, "You only save like this." If you love smiling, she gladly accepted his apologies, thanking him for the ring he had given her. Soon a servant of the Emperor presented himself, unexpectedly inviting Lady Lamberge to an audience with His Majesty in front of the throne room doors. He felt a terrible and unknown magic, along with a cold that cut to the bone upon seeing the Emperor. He wanted to know what magic the heroine had used in the arena, but His Majesty knew from the minister that no one could unleash that much magic. And her eyes were closed as if in sleep, and suddenly the girl heard a familiar voice, feeling her strength returning as well. Genecia insisted it was just a simple defensive spell, but as for the strange, the magic was almost inexplicably fortunate. After sitting her on the couch, the Emperor suddenly decided he liked her. He knew not everyone could do that. Could the heroine create a temporary rune? In that case, she would become an advisor. His Majesty the Emperor knew many longed to serve him, but he didn't see that desire in the gaze of the Lady of Lemberg. He didn't see a problem. His relationship with Kalian was merely a contract. Moreover, the monarch knew the second prince didn't have much time left. He had to let him go, after hearing that and recalling recent events. He concluded that the Emperor was behind it all. At that moment, guards' shouts echoed in the hallway. Kalian burst into the throne room. Upon seeing this, His Majesty ordered the execution of every soldier guarding the entrance. The Emperor wanted the hero to know his place since everyone's lives depended on him. The second prince decided that Genecia really cared about him. Moreover, she's the only one who can take His Majesty back to the past. The father was greatly surprised. They both knew how the court treated Xavier, and for his happiness, he had to ascend to the throne. The Emperor Tescu, the heroine, jumped from her seat completely confused. She was sitting at her desk in the lab. He thought his son was trying to prove his desire to be the successor, laughing to himself. The Emperor had thought before that he saved her because he truly loved her. Upon realizing she was just Kalian's partner, the monarch released both of them and even pardoned the guard. The second prince was suffering a lot, but the heroine knew he had lied to save her. The hero did want to conquer the throne and overthrow the monarchy, but he didn't plan to use Genecia for that. He had suspected it for some time, but after the explosion, Kalian understood that the Emperor had been trying to assassinate him. Now, the Empress would soon discover the hero's intention to take the throne, and would start the hunt against him and his subordinates Rupert, Manuel, Isaac. And all the knights of His Highness knew what they were getting into, but the heroine was different. Kalian didn't want her to become a target because of their false relationship. However, Genecia was determined to see it through to the end, and she thought he should be happy. Not everyone is lucky enough to attract such a talented mage as her. Around that time, Xavier was beginning to recover after the treatment. Jade was glad at least he survived. Just as the butler entered, his name was Lance Million, and he was very worried that his mistress had spent another entire night working. But the fourth prince considered his life useless, since his face was now disfigured. During the duel, he looked at Callian in horror, who suddenly got distracted by the heroine. Remembering that moment, he ran away to save his skin when the explosion occurred. He was lucky to be within the range of Genecia's barriers. The healer managed to cure him, but unfortunately, a huge scar on half his face will remain forever. Lord Wiseman recalled how the Emperor punished him with the whip for not having everything go as planned before, that His Majesty met with Callian and the heroine who refused to reveal the source of that magic. The Emperor knew that the second prince hated him since childhood, and thought he also wanted to turn back time. Now he needed Genecia, and if we are to believe the Minister of Magic, she was close to Lisbel Kendall. Remembering his last encounter with that young blonde lady, Lord Wiseman was left in a daze. She came from a family of sorcerers who lived before in Avalantis, where Haida was also from. So the Emperor decided to assign this task to him. But the Lord wanted to avoid at all costs meeting someone from the Kendall family. They were the most powerful family in the entire region. Realizing that she had truly returned to the past, Genecia decided to ask what day it was today, not understanding what was happening to her mistress. And their distinctive trait was their golden hair. Many years ago, Jade and his family were their slaves. Social status in the Empire is everything, and slaves were treated like garbage. One day, the young hero brought food home and discovered that his mother was missing a leg. Looking at his little sister Ruby, he knew it was probably his fault. Apparently, Mom promised to give her everything she wanted, and the girl wished for one of Lady Lisbeth's ribbons. Ruby thought her mother was too stupid to let herself get caught and lose a leg. Jade ran away immediately after that, hoping to never cross paths with the Kendalls again. Then there was a terrible fire, in which only Lisbel survived, and Mom and Ruby surely died in the meantime. Lady Kendall was furious because everyone only cared about that ungrateful creature. Lisbeth decided that she was the one who should be the center of attention. Now suddenly, she received a visit from a guest from the Ministry of Magic, believing it was Genecia begging for forgiveness. The girl ran to the door, eagerly opening it, was surprised to see Lord Windsor. Back on the sofa, Lady Kendall wanted to know what brought him there, handing him a bouquet of flowers. The professor felt strange. The butler hurried to specify the current date. It turned out she had gone back in time exactly a month before her engagement to Xavier. It was his first relationship without understanding anything Lisbeth remembered. She needed a letter of recommendation from him. Listening to condemnations everywhere, she vented to the Lord, hoping for his compassion. She thought that if he helped her with the transfer, maybe they could get to know each other better, and now the hero was arriving ready to fulfill each of her dreams. Then the girl remembered the secret auction of Kesher. An invitation cost 20 million. Decided that if the Lord loved her, they would go together and buy her a necklace. Sometime later, Rupert handed Genecia a package from his butler. It was a list of 105 wizards from the Magic Tower, and the heroine wanted to find her leader. The Artir Guild couldn't identify him, and she decided to ask Nia about it according to the dragon. The leader of the wizards was Kaon. Singrir, who was as cunning as a fox, Genecia remembered that in her past life, he was also called the Scammer of the Magic Mine. Many invested their money in his project, and he used it to buy everything at the Kesher auction, hoping to reunite with him. He discovered that Manuel's family knew the organizers of this auction well, later learning of their intentions through his people. The heroine wasn't even sure if it would work, but she was healthy again, barely holding back tears. The Emperor didn't understand why he wanted information about the Magic Tower upon discovering he planned to move there. After his contract ended, he realized that Genecia only wanted to live in peace. They also transmitted information to him that the White Knights could be found in the streets of Relson, the Magic Academy, and the secret Kesher auction. Knowing that the protagonist would be there, the second prince decided to go in person upon leaving his office. Lady Ash learned from Rupert that His Highness had feelings for Lady Lemberg. The protagonist saw it as a problem, since she would persuade him to take revenge for sure. But for the lady, it was even good the prince would do everything to achieve his goal and protect her. Ash felt she had something special, something capable of melting even the coldest heart. Manuel was shocked to learn from the conversation that Callian loved the heroine. A week later, he left for the auction in her company, Genevieve. Couldn't even imagine her family had such connections. The protagonist inherited his magic from his mother, and his father's family always excelled in art and fashion, thanks to their social reputation. The head of the auction would welcome the family. She really managed to create a spell that distorts time. Her lab was completely intact and looked pretty tidy. See, yet with open arms, the heroine realized how little she knew about Manuel. But according to him, they barely crossed paths at the academy, however. From what Genevieve remembered, they never interacted. She only observed him from a distance. Then the hero decided to ask if she remembered the local stray dog Moku, upon recalling it instantly. The girl knew he had kept the puppy, moreover. Thanks to that canine, they met personally for the first time that time. The hero saw the student sitting with the dog in the place where she hid from everyone while sharing food with her. Manuel discovered she was already a student in higher courses at that time. Everyone compared him to his older brother, and the hero just wanted to disappear while petting the dog. Genevieve decided that although her life was hell, she never thought about ending it. Unwilling to give up, she decided to love herself first, inspired by her words. The hero gathered the courage to talk to his family and clarify everything. They soon arrived at the auction, and the man at the entrance demanded their invitations upon receiving them, and realizing they were important guests. The man guided them down the hallway. They walked And upon noticing that her notes were back, Genecia fell into complete ecstasy, suddenly remembering the faces of Lizabelle and Xavier. Quite a bit, and the mansion was much larger than it appeared at first glance. When he took out the invitations, the heroine saw an odd black envelope with golden details. It was an envelope from the family, and she had a strange feeling as if she had seen it before Manuel remembered he sent his graduation invitation in a similar envelope. But she never attended. However, Genevieve recalled for sure that she had never received any letter. Blaming himself for not delivering the invitation in person, the hero felt he ruined his party in the meantime. They finally arrived at the very secret Kesher auction wearing their masks. The heroine didn't care about graduation, but what happened to that letter? Inside the hall, there were only 4 people, not counting the host. The heroine hurried to take a seat at the auction chief's table. Honestly, I hoped everyone would find what they desired here. The first lot was a vase made from magical creature tusk. With a starting price of 100,000 gold, the participants began raising their paddles and calling out their bids. One after another, Genecia didn't want to buy anything. She just needed someone to know she was there, those who betrayed and murdered her. Clenching her lips from the fury consuming her, the heroine decided she would never forgive them for what they did. The last lot was a necklace featuring the world's only black diamond with a starting price of 2 million gold. Suddenly, one of the participants who hadn't bid before decided to offer 3 million. The heroine realized that he was the head of the magic tower, and he just wanted to launder money. According to Manuel, she could offer any amount since Her Highness had allocated an obscene amount for the auction. Callian owns the largest mine of magical stones in Giron, so he's a very wealthy man. Genecia finally understood why he was so generous, but the hero decided she was just an exception upon hearing the bids rise. He decided to bid 5 million, hoping it would be enough. The chief of the magicians began to raise the price, and in this race, the heroine didn't notice that the bid rose to 8 million. Suddenly, Lisbeth decided to bid 20 million. The lord sitting next to her jumped in surprise. They didn't have that much money, but she knew that in this auction, you could also pay with organs. Since the professor has 2 eyes and 2 kidneys, he could well sell them for her. Taking off her mask, Genecia ordered him to stop using Lord Windsor and pay from his own pocket. Just remembering the past made her feel disgust, and to clear her mind a bit, she went for a walk in the garden upon hearing someone call her. After suffering a strong shock, Lady Kendall didn't understand how she ended up there upon seeing the blind lord beside her. She decided that the heroine had forced him to come with her in this recap manhwa. Running to the door, Lisbeth burned with the urge to tell the second prince that Genecia was tricking him with another, but the protagonist decided not to judge others by her own standards. And the lord shouldn't be deceived. Lady Kendall uses people and then discards them once they're no longer useful. In response, Lisbeth began to shout at her, mocking how Genecia followed her everywhere. She also recalled when someone left a letter in her locker inviting her to the graduation party. Lady Kendall always believed the protagonist's things were hers, so she took the letter and read it. Upon hearing her mock its ridiculous content, Manuel realized with horror that it was his invitation. Thinking it was sent by a loser, Lisbeth decided that Genecia should be grateful. However, instead, the protagonist slapped her with all her strength. Back in shock, Lady Kendall realized that no one had ever dared to touch her. Furious, decided to fight back, but the heroine calmly stopped her hand. Her dear friend wrote that letter. She immediately recognized that repugnant voice that churned her stomach, smiling at her future fiancé, the prince. And Genecia wanted Lisbeth to stop underestimating other people's efforts. Freeing herself from her grip and irritation, the lady swore to reveal the secret relationship of those two. Manuel never imagined that his feelings for the heroine would so devastatingly affect Her Highness Genecia. She thought people weren't so dumb anymore to believe her inventions just like that. Lisbeth was completely confused. At what point had she changed so much? With a crazed smile, she decided that people don't change and always fall for rumors. Lady Kendall was sure that if she deceived Xavier, she could do the same with Callian. But Genecia already loved the second prince, and she trusted him completely. Suddenly, the head of the mages interrupted the conversation, clarifying that the auction had ended. It turns out that the knight in the black cloak bought the necklace for 200 million. Lisbeth immediately started yelling at Lord Windsor. Accusing him of this, listening to his insults, Callian finally took off the mask and the black hood. Deciding he would fit well among the ranks of sailors, while everyone was in shock, he approached the protagonist and extended the purchased trophy to her. It was the least he could do in gratitude for her faith. Looking at Manuel, Lady Kendall, ruler of the Huron Empire, recognized the bastard as royal family, but did not choose an heir. He was glad to have crossed paths with her in the garden. He gently took her hand, but Genecia pulled her palm away in disgust and pressed it against herself. Decided to seize the moment and accuse Genecia of betraying Her Highness. The second prince was interested to know what she would invent this time for already in the garden. He understood that all her words were a simple lie. Offended by his harsh tone, she abruptly turned around and headed for the exit. Kalia didn't understand who exactly allowed her to leave, but Lisbeth understood that there was a simple fight between her and the protagonist. And he wouldn't do anything to her for that, but organ selling was another matter. If the royal mage tried that, it would harm the royalty. Aware of the seriousness, the prince called the knights and ordered the arrest of Lady Kendall and her accomplices. Furious, she turned to Lord Windsor, demanding help and blaming his greed for everything. The professor did not react. Lisbeth turned back to Genecia, hoping for help from her friend, but the heroine thought the girl should answer for her actions. For a long time, grinding her teeth in rage, the lady swore to kill her someday for this. After her departure, Callian judged it was dangerous and ordered the heroine to leave. Believing it to be a coincidence, the hero was happy to announce that he prepared a dress for the ball. He wanted to inspect the place and search for a secret passage underground. Determined to help, she saw a magical sphere to the side. By putting magic into it, Genecia saw how a hole opened in the wall. Right after that was the descent. That emanated a horrible yet familiar magic. As they entered, the heroes discovered a room covered in corpses. With magical stones embedded, this indicated that the Emperor's source of power was the people. How many had he killed? Callian wanted to take the protagonist with him, but she wanted to understand everything. Sometime later, with the sun high in the sky, Genecia awaited the return of the second prince. He finally returned to the Winter Palace at night, bringing news about an auction. Many were involved in the experiments, and she even had to include the Ministry of Magic on her list of suspects. She was sure that the Emperor needed mages to create magical stones to absorb energy. Everyone is born with a magic particle. To become a mage, one must awaken, and very few can do it alone. Generally, parental help is needed. Hearing that she already had an outfit, Xavier was extremely surprised, knowing she was usually much quieter. Or a mentor, which is why most mages were nobles with resources to awaken. And family knowledge. Almost no one can use magic alone, but with magical stones, anyone can cause an explosion. Most of those stones are mined, but they can also be obtained from human bodies. However, this latter method is perfect for those who want to use magic illegally and go unnoticed. Genecia suspected the Emperor, but she didn't understand why he would want to do something like that. Callian knew that his father's true desire was to achieve eternal life. According to the investigation, the Minister of Magic found the diary of a mage who discovered how to live forever. Knowing it was impossible, the heroine doubted whether to tell Callian about her time travels. The people she had trusted before betrayed her, but despite that, Genecia decided to give him a chance, looking him in the eyes. The heroine confessed that she could turn back time, but that way it was impossible to achieve eternal life. She began to think about how to explain it in simple words, to someone who didn't even know how to use magic, although the second prince didn't need explanations. He simply trusted the protagonist. The prince thought he might have offended her. In her silence, he wanted to tell her everything. Only if she didn't oppose, he wanted to know why the heck she needed to travel back in time. Then Genecia decided to tell him the whole story of how Xavier and Lisbeth betrayed her and almost burned her. Before that, Callian thought she had come to him only because she didn't want to marry the fourth prince. But now he didn't understand how Xavier had even dared to treat her that way. The protagonist returned to take revenge, but upon seeing the guards taking Lady Kendall, she only felt bitterness. Taking her hand, the hero decided that Genecia had a kind heart, easy to hurt, and what he liked most about her was that she remained kind despite everything. Sometime later, the Emperor summoned the second prince to the royal palace's meeting hall. His Majesty knew he was only going to buy a gift for his fiancée and accidentally witnessed a crime. However, he flatly refused to believe such nonsense. At that moment, Callian remembered when he and the heroine found the secret door, sealed in that dungeon. Back then, he assumed that behind it lay a secret passage of the White Knights. But the fury had left her speechless. Suddenly, the butler appeared glad to find his lady. It was the Emperor's secret guard lurking in the shadows and wreaking havoc. Genecia couldn't break the seal on the door, and thought that maybe Nia could do better. The hero didn't understand how he could help a kid, and she had to confess that she was actually a dragon, and now understanding that it was still too early to face his majesty, the second prince decided to withdraw temporarily. He remembered that everyone involved in the auction had been arrested, but they hadn't been interrogated yet. Callian decided not to participate in the investigation. In exchange for a little favor wanting to win over the dragon, he wanted the prize for the tournament winner. The Emperor was confused, thinking he was looking for white knights and magic gems seriously, came to the auction to buy a diamond for that chick. There was no time. The Emperor urgently needed more rejuvenating stones. Meanwhile, Genecia waited for her fiancé in the royal garden, when she suddenly heard male voices talking about Urin, the cousin of His Highness Urin Shu Tyner, approached Lady Lembrecht, only the insecure talk behind backs and the lessons of the... He hurried to clarify to His Highness that the lady hadn't slept all night and worked on her research. Fiancé. She knew that His Highness was Shu Tyner through his mother. Lord Richard. Shu Tyner was the Palatine Duke, and Urin was his disabled son, and now Genecia was happy to meet the prince's cousin, just as she remembered him. Suddenly, they saw Callian, who was already heading toward them, smiling sincerely. Urin hoped that His Highness was well. The second prince, with a grim face, began to examine his cousin, looking at his sick leg. He understood that the hero hadn't recovered. Deciding that he would visit the Duke later, Callian began to leave, calling Genecia, who was running after him. She agreed on the fly with Urin that they would meet again. Meanwhile, Jade arrived at the palace dungeon to speak with Lady Kendall at the Emperor's order. Accepting her inevitable fate, she began to descend, thinking that soon they would execute her upon reaching the right floor. She heard Lisbel's discontented voice, who didn't understand how they dared to feed her so poorly. Seeing her pink hair, the hero was stunned. He couldn't believe his eyes. When she turned to look at him, the girl instantly recognized her dear brother. Jade was trembling in shock and confusion. Understanding that he was fed up with trying to please her, Xavier just smiled at him, then shot a stern look at Lance. What the hell was Ruby doing there? She ordered him to shut up now. It was Lisbel Kendall, the sole survivor of the great wizard family. To Valentis, the girl didn't know how to use magic, but could cast spells thanks to a relic borrowed from the family. The brother scorned her for that deception. But Ruby remembered how they had abandoned her and her mother fleeing. And now she wondered, did he think to tell his new friends who she really was in exchange for their silence? She wanted Jade to free her from that place. If he didn't do it before she died, she would reveal the truth about her origin to everyone. And what they did to the slaves who pretended to be nobles was worse than death. The whole city was in an uproar when it was known that Kalian had imprisoned all the criminals from the auction, knowing that the emperor had pardoned some wizards. Many thought it was because of her noble status. Meanwhile, Ruby arrived without any issues at the second prince's mansion. At the entrance guard, she introduced herself as Lisbel Kendall, the best friend of Lady Lembraiche after meeting her in the waiting room. The heroine wanted to know why Lady Kendall had really come with her head down and embarrassed. Not understanding how a mere butler dared to interrupt their conversation extending his hand, she wanted to apologize for her behavior at the auction, but at the same time felt she couldn't have acted any differently. Well, Genecia was the one who started it all. At first they were inseparable, but then the heroine became obsessed first with Xavier, then with Manuel, and now also with Kalian. She turned her back on their friendship and Lisbeth. She felt so hurt that she started taking it out on her. Shocked by her egocentrism, Genecia never imagined that Lady would disappoint her like this again. The girl confessed that she was forgiven for pretending that she and the heroine worked together on time travel. Genecia remembered how she used to feel guilty for treating her friend that way. However, she decided that their friendship was over once and for all. According to the heroine, friends should respect each other, but Lady Kendall always treated her like a servant. Lisbeth couldn't understand how she dared to say that. But Genecia simply turned around and left, knowing she was being forced to leave without finishing her tea. Lady Kendall remembered that the heroine was a nobody with no manners. Then Genecia dumped the rest of the tea from the teapot on her head, deciding that it was over now and the lady could leave peacefully grinding her teeth and crying in embarrassment. The prince wanted to punish the servant for incompetence in the name of his lady. At that moment, Genecia, the girl swore she would regret this. On the way out, the heroine ran into Kalian, who thought she should have gone to that meeting with her. But in any case, she thought she had done well and now wanted to try cake with her, the emperor. He executed everyone who trafficked in people in this recap manhwa, but Lisbeth managed to avoid punishment. She was locked in the dungeon and couldn't see her majesty. So someone delivered her message, and they needed someone to find out, and the second prince had the perfect person in mind. At night, Genecia went to the hall to wait for the arrival of this guest. Upon opening the doors, she was shocked to see that same guest strangling Rupert and his servants, while cheerfully greeting her. They informed her that the lady would personally pay for the service, and the hero cried for several nights waiting. The stranger turned out to be the leader of the Artir Guild named Miriam, whom His Highness had personally hired. Remembered how he hit her in the face with all his strength, and now Xavier intended to do the same to Lance, who had done nothing wrong. This sparked a brutal fight for the throne among the princes. Genecia's fiancé was that same bastard. Stepping in abruptly and protecting the butler, the heroine decided that anyone who raised their hand against her subordinate would raise it against her. Didn't she understand? Was Her Highness deciding to show his true face like this? Turning around and leaving with the butler left the prince in complete confusion and shock. Quite tired from that day, the heroine knew that Xavier could find his way back. Only returning to the mansion did she find out that Lance was okay. While Lisbeth watched them from behind the bushes, knowing that her friend used to be crazy about Xavier, the girl didn't understand when things changed so much. Later, while serving tea to her lady, the butler discovered that she wanted to reject the engagement with the prince. She understood that he might want to know the reason for such a decision, and she didn't know what to tell him. But Lance just smiled at her words, perfectly understanding the Countess's decision. According to him, she should always be alert as the head of the Lembrec estate. The problem was that if she rejected His Highness gently, she wouldn't achieve anything. So Lance thought she could focus on some young man from a prominent noble family.